frightened, and that he's very uncertain as to not only what is happening next, but what direction his life is going.
Fort Worth, Texas, March 12, 1992. In the quiet darkness of the suburbs, a nightmare unfolded inside the home of Jack and Karen Kozlow. Two men slipped inside while the couple slept. Armed with blunt weapons, they launched a savage attack. By the time it was over, 40-year-old Karen lay lifeless on the bedroom floor, beaten beyond recognition. Her husband, Jack, clung to life, barely conscious, bleeding, but alive. At first glance, it seemed like a violent home invasion, one of those random tragedies that can strike any family. But the truth was far darker. This wasn't the work of burglars. It was an inside job. And at the center of it all was Jack's own daughter, 17-year-old Christy Kozlow. To the outside world, Christy looked like the picture of privilege. Born in 1975, she grew up in a wealthy Texas household where money was never scarce. She had nice clothes, a comfortable home, and every opportunity her peers could envy. But beneath that facade of privilege was resentment. Christy wasn't satisfied with what she had. She didn't want to wait for her inheritance or build a life of her own. She wanted the family fortune immediately, and she was willing to kill for it. According to prosecutors, Christy's greed and impatience took shape as a deadly plan. She believed her father's estate was worth over $1 million. If her stepmother Karen was eliminated, and if her father didn't survive either, Christy stood to gain it all. But she wasn't going to get her own hands dirty. Instead, she turned to her boyfriend, Brian Salter, and his friend Jeffrey Dillingham. She promised them money, jewelry, and her father's car in exchange for carrying out the murders. Together, the three conspired to unleash violence inside the Kozlow home. In the early morning hours of March 12th, Salter and Dillingham crept into the master bedroom while Jack and Karen were asleep. The attack was frenzied and merciless. Karen bore the brunt of the assault, beaten to death with a hammer. Jack, struck repeatedly, somehow clung to life. Barely able to breathe, he would later recall drifting in and out of consciousness as the attackers left him for dead. His survival would prove to be the one thread that unraveled the entire scheme. When police first arrived, the scene looked like a botched burglary. The Kozlow home showed signs of forced entry, and valuables were missing. But detectives weren't convinced. Something about the staging felt wrong. And when Jack regained enough strength to speak, the case took a sharp turn. He described what little he remembered about the attack. He couldn't identify the intruders by name, but he was certain the violence wasn't random. His instincts told him something more sinister was at play. As investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies began to surface. Christy's behavior was cold, detached, almost rehearsed. Instead of grieving for her murdered stepmother or worrying over her father's survival, she seemed focused on appearances. Detectives noticed her lack of shock and the casual way she spoke about the crime. Behind closed doors, she boasted to friends about her role in the plot. It wasn't long before police connected the dots. The supposed home invasion was no burglary at all. It was a murder for hire, orchestrated by a teenager against her own family. The arrest of Christy, Brian Salter, and Jeffrey Dillingham stunned Fort Worth. The story made headlines across Texas, a wealthy high school girl accused of arranging her stepmother's murder. In court, the details were laid bare. The prosecution described Christy as manipulative, greedy, and utterly remorseless. Witnesses recalled how she smirked during testimony, how she showed no tears, no regret for Karen's brutal death. To the jury, she appeared unmoved by the fact that her own father had been left for dead in his own home. The co-conspirators faced their own reckonings. Jeffrey Dillingham, described as the more violent of the two attackers, received the harshest penalty. In 2000, he was executed by lethal injection. Brian Salter, Christie's boyfriend, was sentenced to life in prison, and Christie herself, barely an adult when she masterminded the attack, was convicted of capital murder in 1994 and given a life sentence. The sentences highlighted the uneven application of justice in Texas. One man executed, 2 others consigned to decades in prison, all for the same deadly scheme. Today, more than 30 years later, Christie Kozlow remains behind bars at the Hobby Unit in Texas. She is now in her 50s, having spent more than half her life in prison walls. She has grown older, but her name remains tied to one of the most chilling cases of family betrayal in Texas history. What makes the Christie Kozlow case so haunting is not just the violence, but the motive. This wasn't an act of passion or a crime born out of desperation. It was greed, calculated, cold, and fueled by impatience. A teenager with every advantage at her fingertips decided that murder was the fastest route to wealth. And in doing so, she destroyed her stepmother's life, nearly ended her father's, and condemned herself to spend the rest of her days in a prison cell. Jack Kozlow survived, but he carried the scars of that night for the rest of his life. For the community of Fort Worth, the crime was a chilling reminder. Sometimes the most dangerous threat doesn't come from strangers breaking in during the night. Sometimes it comes from the person you raised, the person you trusted, the person sitting at your own dinner table.
Like, I was scared and I was like crimping, and then I had made the gun go off, not purposely though, but like it went to the back of the room.
Clear Lake City, Texas, July 18, 2003. The afternoon sun was fading when something unimaginable happened inside a quiet home on the 3,700 block of Millbridge Drive. It was supposed to be a normal day. 4 young friends gathered in a living room, talking, laughing, making plans. But in a matter of minutes, that safe suburban world turned deadly. When the police arrived, they found a crime scene so brutal, so senseless, it would haunt Texas for years. 4 promising young lives, Tiffany Rowell, Marcus Priscilla, Adelbert Sanchez, and Rachel Colorutis, were shot and bludgeoned to death in a vicious attack that seemed to come out of nowhere. But the biggest shock of all, the person behind the massacre wasn't a stranger. It was someone they trusted, a girl they had welcomed, helped, and befriended. 17-year-old Christine Paulilla. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to know Christine's story. Born in 1986, she faced hardship early. She lost her father in a work accident as a toddler. A rare form of alopecia left her almost completely bald as a child, and she grew up wearing wigs and being tormented by classmates. By the time Christine entered Clear Lake High School, she was painfully shy and deeply insecure. That changed when 2 girls, Tiffany Rowell and Rachel Colorutis, reached out to her. They gave her makeovers, helped her with makeup and hair, and more importantly, offered friendship. Christine's transformation was so striking, she was voted Miss Irresistible by her classmates, proof that the kindness of a few can change a life. But beneath the surface, Christine's insecurities never really faded. As she got older, she struggled with depression and began experimenting with drugs. She fell into a relationship with Christopher Snyder, a boyfriend who was older, troubled, and increasingly controlling. The pair spiraled deeper into substance abuse, and Christine became isolated from the very friends who had once saved her from loneliness. What happened next was shocking in its cruelty. On July 18th, Christine and Snyder went to Tiffany Rowell's house, where Tiffany, Marcus Priscilla, Rachel Colorutis, and Adelbert Sanchez were spending the afternoon. The official story would later claim it was a drug-related robbery, but the facts reveal a much darker motive, one rooted in jealousy, addiction, and a desperate need to belong. The attack was sudden and merciless, Christine and Snyder pulled out guns, and the living room erupted in chaos. All four friends were shot at close range. When the guns jammed, the killers used the butts of the weapons to bludgeon the wounded. In the end, there was no escape. Even as Rachel Koloroutis, Christine's closest friend, begged for her life, reportedly asking why, with her dying breath, the violence did not stop. It was an act of complete betrayal. The very people who had helped Christine become someone new were now victims of her rage and pain. The aftermath stunned the community. Tiffany, Rachel, Marcus, and Adalbert were all popular, well-liked students, known for their kindness and loyalty. Their families were left shattered, struggling to comprehend how one of their own could have turned so violently against them. For 3 years, the case went cold. Christine Paulilla vanished, changing her appearance, marrying another man, and trying to build a new life. But the truth has a way of surfacing. In 2006, an anonymous tip finally led police to Christine. She was arrested and charged with capital murder. In court, Christine claimed she had no memory of the killings, insisting she had blacked out during the attack. Prosecutors, however, showed evidence of careful planning and intent. They argued that Christine's deep-seated insecurities, drug dependency, and toxic relationship with Snyder had led her to a breaking point, a moment where she turned on the friends who had once rescued her. The jury didn't buy her defense. In 2009, Christine Paulilla was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her accomplice, Christopher Snyder, never faced justice. As police closed in, he took his own life, leaving Christine to answer for both their crimes. Today, Christine Paulilla is 39 years old, serving her sentence at the Mountain View Unit in Texas. Decades later, her name is still synonymous with one of the worst acts of betrayal in Texas history. A story of a girl who could not escape her own pain, who repaid kindness with violence and who destroyed 4 young lives in the process. What makes the Clear Lake murders so chilling isn't just the violence, but the motive. This wasn't about money or revenge against strangers. It was the total collapse of trust between friends, the ultimate violation of loyalty and love. Christine Paulilla's story stands as a grim reminder. Even the deepest wounds, if left untreated, can become something unrecognizable. And sometimes, the hand you reach out to help can be the one that turns against you in the end.
Exactly 8:46 this morning, and within minutes, courtroom observers, the same age as the 16-year-old, were struck by her demeanor.
El Dorado Hills, California, June 11, 2009. A quiet suburban home became the scene of a shocking betrayal, one that would leave a community reeling and a daughter forever marked by her actions. 14-year-old Tyler Witt, driven by rebellion and anger, conspired with her older boyfriend, Stephen Culver, to end the life of the woman who had raised her, her own mother, Joanne Witt. Tyler was born in the mid-1990s and grew up as the only child of a single mother. Joanne Witt, an engineer by trade, was described as protective and hardworking. She raised Tyler alone, providing a comfortable life in El Dorado Hills, a place where crime felt distant, almost unthinkable. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Tyler was a rebellious teenager who constantly pushed against her mother's boundaries. Fights over curfews, friends, and especially her relationship with Stephen Culver, a young man nearly a decade older, became a daily battle in the Witt household. By the time Tyler met Stephen Culver, she was searching for freedom and belonging. Their romance quickly turned intense and obsessive. When Joanne discovered the relationship, she acted, reporting Culver to authorities for statutory rape, desperate to protect her daughter from a man she saw as dangerous and manipulative. For Tyler, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. Her anger and resentment boiled over. She didn't see a mother trying to protect her. She saw an enemy standing in the way of the love she believed was real. The depth of Tylar's anger became painfully clear in her own words. In the days leading up to the murder, she wrote a letter to Joanne, 3 words that would echo long after the crime. "I hate you." It was a chilling signal of what was to come, a final break in the fragile bond between mother and daughter. The attack itself was brutal and calculated. On the night of June 11th, while Joanne slept, Tyler and Stephen put their plan into action. Armed with a knife, Culver stabbed Joanne more than 20 times. Tyler was not the one holding the weapon, but she was there, participating in the planning, standing by during the attack, and helping to cover up the crime. Afterward, the pair attempted to stage a suicide pact, hoping to craft a tragic narrative that would disguise the truth, that Joanne Witt's life had been taken by the daughter she fought so hard to protect. Their story began to unravel almost immediately. When police began investigating the staged suicide, inconsistencies appeared. Tyler and Stephen's accounts didn't match, and evidence at the crime scene pointed to a carefully orchestrated murder rather than a spontaneous tragedy. It wasn't long before the truth came out. Joanne's own daughter had betrayed her in the most final way possible. The trial that followed gripped the nation. The motive was clear: a forbidden love, fueled by teenage rebellion and a desperate need for control. Prosecutors painted Tyler as a manipulative teen who plotted her mother's death to avoid consequences and keep her relationship with Culver alive. The defense argued that Tyler was a vulnerable, easily influenced girl, caught in the orbit of an older man who manipulated her into violence. But in the end, Tyler herself provided the most damning testimony, turning against Stephen Culver in exchange for a reduced sentence. Tyler Witt pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a sentence of 15 years to life in prison. Stephen Culver, found guilty of first-degree murder, was sentenced to 26 years to life. For many, it seemed like justice had been served, but the scars ran deep, especially for a community left to ask how things could have gone so wrong. But Tyler's story didn't end behind bars. In 2022, after serving 14 years, she was granted parole. By 2023, she walked out of prison, a free woman, but forever changed. Now using the name Charlie, Tyler has spoken publicly about her crime, expressing regret and taking responsibility for her actions. In a rare 2024 interview, she discussed her growth, her time in rehabilitation, and the pain she caused. Today, she lives privately, likely still in California, hoping to rebuild a life from the ashes of tragedy. What makes the Tyler Witt case so haunting isn't just the violence, but the motive that drove it. A teenager so consumed by rebellion and obsession that she conspired against her own mother. Joanne Witt died trying to protect her child, a victim not only of a crime but of the very love that should have kept her safe. For Tyler, the cost was her own freedom and her mother's life. For El Dorado Hills, the shock lingers, a reminder that sometimes danger comes not from the outside, but from within our own walls. If you've made it this far and want more true crime stories that explore the darkest corners of family and trust, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. There's always another story to tell.
Maybe 10, 15 years into my sentence, I really didn't even understand what happened. Honestly, I sat and tried to figure it all out.
Gary, Indiana, May 14th, 1985. It was a quiet afternoon when 78-year-old Ruth Pelkey, a beloved Bible teacher and widow, opened her door to 4 teenage girls seeking a lesson in faith. What she didn't know was that 15-year-old Paula Cooper, alongside Karen Corder, Denise Thomas, and April Beverly, had something far darker in mind. Their motive was shockingly small: $10 and a set of car keys, enough for a night of arcade games. What followed would become one of Indiana's most notorious crimes, a story of brutality, loss, and ultimately, forgiveness. Paula Cooper's story began in violence. Born into a troubled home, she suffered years of severe abuse, both physical and otherwise. Those who later studied her case described a childhood defined by chaos and pain, factors that would help explain, but never excuse, the rage that boiled inside her. By her early teens, Cooper's world had already come off its rails, her life shaped by anger, neglect, and the influence of a peer group as lost as she was. That May afternoon, Cooper and her friends arrived at Ruth Pelkey's modest home under the guise of wanting Bible lessons. Pelkey, a woman known for her kindness, generosity, and unwavering faith, welcomed them inside. She believed in redemption and second chances, hoping she could help guide these young girls onto a better path. But her trust would be repaid with unthinkable betrayal. Inside, the atmosphere shifted quickly. The girls, emboldened by each other's presence, attacked. Cooper led the charge, wielding a butcher knife with terrifying resolve. Ruth Pelkey was stabbed 33 times and beaten with a vase. As she lay dying, witnesses later said, she prayed for her attackers, uttering her final words, "If you do this, the Lord will punish you." Even in her last moments, Pelkey chose faith over fear, forgiveness over hate. The aftermath was a scene of heartbreak. The girls ransacked the home, taking just $10 and a set of car keys before fleeing. Their crime sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, leaving friends and neighbors in disbelief. How could 4 teenagers murder an elderly woman who had shown them nothing but kindness? It didn't take long for authorities to catch up with the group. After using Pelkey's stolen car and being questioned by police, Cooper and her accomplices confessed. The investigation revealed the level of planning involved, the choice of victim, the deception to gain entry, and the cold efficiency with which the attack was carried out. It was the kind of crime investigators struggled to make sense of, methodical, cruel, and in the end, heartbreakingly pointless. Paula Cooper pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death in 1986, becoming the youngest person on death row in the United States at just 16. Her sentence triggered a global outcry. The Vatican, human rights organizations, and people around the world protested the execution of a teenager. Letters poured in by the thousands, including one from Pope John Paul II himself. For many, it wasn't just about Cooper. It was a question of justice, mercy, and what society owes even its youngest offenders. In 1989, the Indiana Supreme Court commuted her sentence to 60 years in prison, citing her age and traumatic background. Behind bars, Cooper worked to rebuild her life. She earned a college degree, tutored other inmates, and became a symbol in the international debate about juvenile justice. But time inside changes a person, and for Cooper, life after release proved impossible to navigate. In 2013, after serving 28 years, she walked out of prison, only to die by suicide 2 years later, unable to find a path in a world that had moved on without her. Yet, out of the tragedy, an extraordinary act of forgiveness emerged. Bill Pelkey, Ruth's grandson, made headlines when he publicly forgave Paula Cooper for his grandmother's murder. He went on to advocate against the death penalty, telling anyone who would listen, forgiveness is the only way to heal. For him, mercy wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about refusing to let hate define the future. Bill's decision offered a powerful reminder. In the face of unthinkable loss, compassion can be stronger than vengeance. Today, Paula Cooper's name is still remembered, part cautionary tale, part symbol of a justice system grappling with the realities of youth, trauma, and rehabilitation. Ruth Pelkey is remembered for her unwavering faith and kindness. Their lives remain forever entwined in a story of trust betrayed and the difficult road to forgiveness For Gary, Indiana, the pain of that spring day never fully faded. The lesson endures. Sometimes the smallest decisions, a moment of trust, a flash of anger, a simple act of kindness, can shape lives in ways we can never predict. Mesquite, Nevada, January 21st, 2003. In a quiet desert town just outside Las Vegas, a crime unfolded so senseless and cruel that it would haunt the region for decades. It was an act of calculated vengeance, planned and carried out not by seasoned criminals, but by two teenagers, 16-year-old Monique Maestas and her 19-year-old brother, Bo. Their targets were not adults. They were children, caught in the crossfire of a world they never asked to enter. Monique was born in 1986, her childhood marked by instability and exposure to the dangerous world of illegal substances. Growing up, she learned to navigate chaos, often turning to petty crime and dangerous friendships. By her mid-teens, Monique was already well known to police, tangled in the same web as her older brother. The Maestas siblings lived on the margins, desperate for acceptance, respect, and a sense of belonging. But that desperation would turn deadly when they believed themselves betrayed in a drug deal. The trouble began with a simple grudge. The Maestas siblings were convinced they'd been shortchanged in a transaction with a local couple. The specifics of the argument have long since faded into court records, but the anger it sparked would set in motion an unthinkable plan. Rather than confront the adults involved, Monique and Bo decided to exact revenge on their children, an act as shocking as it was deliberate. The night of January 21st, Monique and Bo made their way to the Mesquite home of the victims. Inside were two little girls, 3-year-old Christine Maestas and 10-year-old Brittany Bergeron. Their parents were away. What happened next would devastate two families forever. Armed with knives, the Maestas siblings attacked the children in their beds. Christine, just a toddler, was stabbed multiple times. Brittany, her older half-sister, was also brutally assaulted and left for dead. The violence was not frenzied, but methodical, a chilling display of premeditated cruelty. When the siblings left, they believed they had silenced both girls forever. But against all odds, Brittany survived. Gravely injured and paralyzed from the waist down, she summoned the strength to identify her attackers to police. Her courage, in the face of unimaginable trauma, would prove crucial in bringing Monique and Bo to justice. Brittany's words in court, "They took my sister away from me," became the haunting heart of the trial. She became not just a survivor, but a voice for her sister who would never speak again. The investigation moved quickly. With Brittany's testimony and forensic evidence, police arrested the Maestas siblings. In the courtroom, Monique showed little emotion. Prosecutors painted her as manipulative, hardened by a life of crime even at 16. The details of the attack shocked even seasoned investigators. There was no motive that could make sense of such cruelty, just a twisted sense of vengeance carried out on the most vulnerable. In 2006, Monique Maestas pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and attempted murder. Because she was a minor at the time, she was spared the death penalty, but the judge made it clear her crimes would not be forgotten. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, with eligibility for parole after 47 years. Bo Maestas, the older brother, received a similar fate, sentenced to life with no chance of parole. But Monique's story didn't end there. In 2009, news broke that she had begun a romantic relationship with a corrections officer while behind bars. The officer was later convicted, a reminder of Monique's ongoing pattern of poor judgment and manipulation. Even in prison, she continued to make choices that suggested a lack of remorse, or at least a failure to understand the gravity of her actions. Today, Monique Maestas remains incarcerated in Nevada, most likely at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center. Her first chance at parole will come around 2050, by which time she will have spent the majority of her life in a cell. Her brother Beau remains behind bars as well, a sibling partnership now remembered only for its brutality. What makes the case of Monique Maestas so chilling isn't just the violence, but the innocence of the victims. This wasn't a crime born out of desperation or even direct anger at the adults involved. It was cold, calculated revenge unleashed on children. It's a story that speaks to the ripple effect of substance abuse and unresolved conflict, a reminder that in the world of drugs and crime, it is often the innocent who pay the highest price. For the families of Christine and Brittany, the pain will never fade. One sister lost forever, the other forced to live with the scars, both physical and emotional, for the rest of her life. And for the town of Mesquite, the question lingers. How could anyone cross that final line, betraying not just the law, but humanity itself? East Moline, Illinois, January 21st, 2005. On an ordinary winter day, a scene of unthinkable violence unfolded in the parking lot of a local Taco Bell, a place where teenagers usually gathered for laughter and gossip after school. But on that day, 16-year-old Sarah Kolb, fueled by jealousy and rage, conspired with her friend Corey Gregory to end the life of another 16-year-old, Adrian Reynolds. The crime would shock not only their small community, but also the nation for its brutality and the chilling coldness with which it was carried out. Sarah Kolb was not a stranger to the turbulence of adolescence. Born in 1988, she spent her high school years struggling to fit in, drifting among friend groups and searching for her place in the world. All that changed when Adrian Reynolds arrived at school. Adrian, an aspiring singer new to Illinois, brought with her an infectious optimism and a bright personality. Within weeks, she had made friends easily, becoming part of the same social circle as Kolb and Gregory. For Adrian, it was a fresh start. For Sarah, it was the beginning of deep resentment. The root of that resentment can be traced through Sarah's own words. In private journals, she wrote extensively about her hatred for the new girl. Adrian's natural charm and ability to integrate threatened Sarah's fragile position within their group, and her growing closeness to Corey Gregory stoked the fires of jealousy. What began as envy quickly turned toxic, simmering beneath the surface until, on that fateful January day, it finally boiled over. The events of January 21st started like any other teenage hangout. Sarah, Corey, and Adrian met up at Taco Bell after school. But what Adrian didn't know was that she had been lured there under false pretenses. As the three sat in a parked car, the situation turned deadly. In a fit of rage, Sarah attacked Adrian, strangling her while Corey assisted. The murder was swift and shocking, but it was what happened next that truly revealed the calculated evil at play. Desperate to hide their crime, Sarah and Corey transported Adriana's body to a remote location outside town. There, with chilling precision, they attempted to burn her remains, then dismembered the body and scattered the parts in two different locations. Their methodical disposal was designed to erase all trace of their victim and avoid detection. In doing so, they showed a complete disregard for Adriana's humanity and for the pain they would inflict on her loved ones. Adriana's disappearance sparked immediate concern. Her family, who had only recently settled in Illinois, described her as trusting, enthusiastic, and eager for new opportunities. They couldn't have imagined that the friendships she so desperately sought would lead to her death. For days, the search for Adrian continued, hope fading as investigators pieced together the truth. The breakthrough came when Corey Gregory, racked by guilt, eventually confessed to police. His testimony provided the details authorities needed to recover Adrian's remains and bring charges against both himself and Sarah. The brutality of the murder and the subsequent cover-up shocked even seasoned investigators. In court, Sarah Kolb's demeanor was as cold as her crime. She showed no remorse, reportedly smiling as prosecutors recounted the horrific details of Adrian's final moments. The community watched in disbelief as a teenage girl, barely old enough to drive, appeared utterly disconnected from the devastation she had caused. The trial revealed a young woman consumed by jealousy, one who would rather destroy than be replaced. In 2006, Sarah Kolb was convicted of first-degree murder and concealment of a homicide. The judge handed down a sentence of 53 years in prison, 48 for murder, and 5 for her attempt to cover it up. Corey Gregory received a similar fate, with decades to serve behind bars. Despite a wave of juvenile justice reforms across the country, an Illinois appellate court ruled in 2023 that Kolb's crimes were simply too severe to merit resentencing. The impact on the families involved, the loss, the trauma, the unanswered questions, was too great to ignore. Today, Sarah Kolb remains incarcerated at Logan Correctional Center in Illinois. Now in her mid-30s, she has already spent more years in prison than she ever experienced as a free woman. Her earliest possible release is not projected until around 2058. Over the years, there has been no public sign of remorse or change, just the long, slow march of time behind bars. The story of Adrienne Reynolds stands as a painful reminder of how quickly teenage jealousy can spiral into violence, and how a single act can destroy two families forever. For Adrienne's loved ones, her memory remains a symbol of trust misplaced and kindness betrayed. And for East Moline, the case of Sarah Kolb endures as a chilling lesson. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemies are the ones who sit beside us, wearing a friend's smile. Sasebo, Japan. June 1st, 2004. Inside the quiet halls of Okubo Elementary School, an act of violence unfolded that would send shockwaves across Japan and eventually the world. 11-year-old Natsumi Tsuji, known for her intelligence and reserved nature, lured her classmate, 12-year-old Satomi Mitarai, into an empty classroom during the lunch break. What happened next would change both families forever and ignite a storm of controversy about childhood, the digital world, and society's fascination with juvenile crime. Natsumi Tsuji was born in November 1992 and quickly gained a reputation for academic brilliance. With an IQ of 143, she was recognized by her teachers as a gifted student, quiet, studious, and diligent. But while her academic scores soared, her social life lagged behind. Tsuji was intensely introverted, spending her time reading manga, surfing the internet, and increasingly exploring dark corners of the web, including disturbing sites featuring graphic violence. Her parents and teachers saw only her quiet exterior, missing the isolation and dangerous curiosity growing beneath the surface. Satomi Mitarai, on the other hand, was known for her cheerful, friendly nature. She was outgoing, well-liked, and trusted Natsumi as a friend. The two girls had bonded online and at school, but behind that friendship, tensions brewed, rooted in the new digital landscape that shaped their generation. An online argument had erupted between them. The cause was petty, even by adolescent standards. Mitarai had called Tsuji goofy and pretentious on her personal website. What seemed like harmless teasing would become the catalyst for a tragedy no one could have predicted. The attack was chilling in its precision. During lunch, Tsuji asked Mitarai to come with her, promising a game in an empty classroom. Once inside, she blindfolded Satomi, turning the scene into a cruel mockery of friendship and trust. Then, using a box cutter she'd brought from home, Tsuji slit Satomi's throat and arms with calculated brutality. The wounds were fatal. Satomi bled to death, alone, in the corner of a classroom. Her life ended over a trivial, digital slight. What makes the case even more disturbing is what happened next. Tsuji, still covered in blood, calmly returned to her class as if nothing had happened. When teachers noticed the blood, she confessed immediately. but her face betrayed little emotion. To investigators, she spoke simply, almost clinically. "I would like to apologize." The lack of remorse, the composure from a child so young, stunned even experienced police officers. News of the crime spread quickly, but it was the internet's reaction that took the story in an unexpected direction. A photograph of Tsuji, taken days before the murder, went viral. In it, she wore a blue Nevada sweatshirt, earning her the nickname Nevada Tan among online communities. Soon, fan art, conspiracy theories, and memes flooded message boards around the world. The digital fascination with Tsuji's crime raised uncomfortable questions. Why do we turn killers into icons? What does it say about us as a society when tragedy becomes entertainment? For Satomi Mitarai's family, the pain was unbearable. They had lost a daughter, betrayed by a friend, murdered in a place meant to be safe. The randomness of the violence, the way a minor online argument turned deadly, became a cautionary tale for families everywhere. In the age of digital communication, words and slights that seem harmless can sometimes lead to unthinkable consequences. Under Japan's strict juvenile law, Natsumi Tsuji's punishment was controversial. At just 11, she was too young for adult prosecution, so she was sent to a reformatory for psychiatric evaluation and treatment. For years, her whereabouts and progress were kept private, protected by Japan's commitment to giving juveniles a chance at rehabilitation rather than simply punishment. Around the age of 18 or 20, Tsuji was quietly released, reportedly under a new name, her identity shielded from public view. To this day, her location is unknown, a testament to Japan's privacy laws and its belief in second chances. Even for those who have committed unthinkable acts, the story of Natsumi Tsuji, her intelligence, her isolation, and her descent into violence, continues to haunt Japan. The case exposed cracks in the system, the hidden struggles of gifted children, the impact of online culture, and the dangers of overlooking emotional warning signs. It also highlighted the uncomfortable reality that fascination with youth crime, amplified by the internet, can turn tragedy into spectacle. For the people of Sasebo, the memory of that day has never faded. Satomi Mitarai is remembered not as a victim of internet fame, but as a cheerful, trusting girl whose life was taken far too soon. And for parents, teachers, and communities around the world, the case stands as a stark warning. The digital age has given new weight to old dangers, and the line between virtual drama and real-world violence has never been thinner. Altamonte Springs, Florida, February 10, 2004. It was just after midnight when a nightmare unfolded behind the walls of a quiet apartment complex. 16-year-old Courtney Schulhoff and her boyfriend, Michael Morin, waited for the world to fall asleep. Then, in the silence of the night, they crept into the bedroom where Courtney's father, Frank Schulhoff, lay resting. Armed with a baseball bat, they attacked with a fury that left the walls spattered and the neighborhood in shock. By morning, Frank was dead, bludgeoned while he slept, the victim of a crime that would devastate a family and leave an entire community searching for answers. From the outside, the Schulhoff story might have seemed unremarkable. Courtney was born in late 1987 in Washington, D.C., before moving with her father to Florida. She was, by all appearances, just another teenager struggling with adolescence and authority. But the truth was more complicated. Courtney described her father as controlling and harsh, a man who kept strict rules and tried to rein in her growing rebellion. In court, Frank was painted as a strict but well-meaning parent, desperate to keep his daughter on the right path. There was no evidence of abuse, only the chasm of misunderstanding and resentment that often grows between parents and their teenage children. But for Courtney, the tension was too much. By the time she met Michael Morin, a troubled 20-year-old with a checkered past. The gap between her and her father had become a canyon. Michael offered her something she didn't find at home: validation, excitement, and the feeling of being understood. Together, they spiraled into a relationship defined by anger and defiance, against her father, against authority, against anything that stood in their way. The plan was as cold as it was shocking. According to prosecutors, the pair waited until Frank Schulhoff was asleep. Armed with a baseball bat, a weapon that requires brutal, sustained effort, they crept into his room. What happened next was a calculated act of violence, a flurry of blows that ended Frank's life. There were no warning signs, no opportunity for defense. This was not a momentary lapse or an act of self-defense. It was premeditated, a crime that required nerve and a chilling sense of betrayal. In the aftermath, Courtney and Michael tried to cover their tracks. They concocted a story, insisting that Frank had been the victim of an intruder, but detectives were quick to notice cracks in their account. Their stories didn't line up. Evidence began piling up: Courtney's inconsistent statements, Michael's nervous behavior, forensic evidence in the apartment. Within 24 hours, suspicion closed in on the young couple. Once in custody, the details began to spill out. Investigators learned that the murder had been discussed and planned in advance. There was no evidence that Frank had threatened his daughter's safety or well-being. Instead, the motive was simple: a toxic relationship, teenage anger, and a desire for freedom at any cost. The betrayal was total, a daughter turning against her father in the one place he should have felt safest. The trial gripped Central Florida. In court, Courtney Schulhoff appeared detached, at times almost defiant. Prosecutors described her as manipulative and unremorseful, while the defense tried to cast her as a victim of circumstance, manipulated by an older, more dangerous boyfriend. The jury was unmoved. In 2006, Courtney was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate shared by Michael Morin. It was a harsh sentence, but one that matched the brutality of the crime. But Courtney's story didn't end there. Over the years, as the national debate over juvenile justice evolved, her case was revisited. Lawmakers and activists began to question whether it was right to sentence juveniles to die in prison for crimes committed before they were fully grown. In 2017, after more than a decade behind bars, Courtney was resentenced. This time, the court gave her 40 years, a glimmer of hope that she might one day walk free. Unlike her younger self, Courtney showed remorse. She spoke of regret, acknowledging the pain she caused her family and the gravity of her actions. It was a stark contrast to the teenage defiance she once wore like armor. Today, at 37, Courtney Schulhoff remains incarcerated in Florida, her projected release set for 2044. She has spent more than half her life behind bars, haunted by the night she traded her father's life for a fleeting sense of freedom. Frank Schulhoff's death left scars that will never fully heal. A father's life ended by the child he was trying to protect. What makes the Courtney Schulhoff case so haunting isn't just the violence, but the motive. This was not a crime born of desperation or self-defense, but a calculated act driven by resentment and rage. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous betrayals happen within the walls of our own homes, delivered by those we trust most. For the community of Altamonte Springs, the lesson endures. Family bonds, once shattered, can never be fully repaired.